Well, hello, hello, hello. And I want to welcome you to History Underground. Now, we haven't done this in quite some time, and we'll go into that later. But, so happy to be here with you all. And so let's talk a little about what's kind of going to happen tonight. Well, we're going to talk about a work of art down at Valley Bar at about Winnie Ruth Judd, as well as a couple other folks around the state of Arizona that have got a pretty cool story. Some of them you may even have heard of. Hey, Nikki, welcome back. So I want to welcome you all. So now, normally we would do this in the basement of Valley Bar, but we're not able to right now. So again, I want to welcome you all to History Underground. And I just want you to know that this is made possible by your support. So basically, I guess about 2 months ago, feels like longer than that. So this is pretty much kind of my full-time gig and had to cancel a lot of different events, including History Underground. And so I was so excited when Valley Bar called me up again and said, hey, let's do that again. So hopefully, maybe things will change in the near future. Maybe I'll be back at Valley Bar. Who knows? So those of you who know Valley Bar, you'll know it's a basement bar. Now, to get to Valley Bar, you can go to the Historic Alley. And actually, the last performance I did was at Valley Bar. But, we got our wires crossed, and I didn't know it was canceled until I was already there. And so I was just kind of hanging out in this historic alley, and actually 4 people showed up. So we did an impromptu History Underground right there in the alley. So we were able to talk a little bit about Melinda's Alley and why is it called Melinda's Alley, or actually Melinda's Alley. So my friend Deb at one point, so this goes back to the early 1900s when there were a variety of live work alleys in the city. They didn't show up on maps, but they were very vibrant places. And so this alley in particular was kind of our red light district, our Skid Row. And so my friend Deb and we didn't know for the longest time, we didn't know why it was called Melinda's Alley. All we knew was it had shown up in print a couple times, referred to as that. And my friend Deb at one point was researching and came across the name Melinda Curtis. And that was the benefactor of Melinda's Alley. Now, what we do know about her was, she liked men. She had a husband who was much older than she was, and he passed away. But, she still liked men. So there's a story about how she had one boyfriend that tried to drag her home from work, and she wasn't ready to go. So she did what any of you ladies would do. She pulled out a knife and she stabbed him. Now, as he's falling on his face, exclaiming that Melinda has gone down and stabbed me, he falls flat on his face and dead. So they go to court, and she is found not guilty. Now, when that verdict is read, several members of his family pass out. And so from there, she makes her way to Tucson, and her and her best friend Roxy have kind of become courtesans. And so they engage a married man in a little too heated of a conversation, and he winds up losing a little bag of money. And so, off to court they go again. Now, her best friend is found guilty, and Melinda is found not guilty. Now, she makes her way right up here to Phoenix, working in this alley, but kind of gives up that quarters way of life, but takes on more of a management role and becomes a madam. And it was said she would help you regardless of the color of your skin, your situation in your life, or position. And for that, everyone really loved Melinda, except when she had too much gin. And that was part of her downfall. So when she passed away, they actually name this alley after her. So now my name is Marshall Shore. I'm also known as the Hip Historian. Now you might wonder, how does one get a name like the Hip Historian? Well, you know, about 20 years ago, I was working in a library in Brooklyn, and it was cold, it was wet, and I was ready for a change. So loaded up everything we own into a big orange cube and brought it right here to Arizona and brought it basically home to where it started. Because, you know, U-Haul has their world headquarters right here in Phoenix. Now, when we got here, we promptly moved into a 1956 ranch house. And I like to say when we bought it, it was beige on beige on beige on beige on beige on. It was so much beige. I'm happy to say now it is a two-tone seafoam and cantaloupe. Now, this is what my kitchen looks like today. The house is pretty much a time capsule, and we try to keep it to that. Now, as soon as we got here, all we kept hearing about how there was no history. And we knew that wasn't true because every time we went somewhere, there was always an adventure and a good story. Indeed, Nikki, it was Deb Branning. And then you have that post-war boom that I think in a lot of ways made the Arizona that we all know and love today. All those GIs that either were stationed here, trained here, or passed through on their way to somewhere else. And after the war, they were moving to Arizona in huge numbers, and in some cases looking for a house just like mine. And then there's this man, which, you know, we're going to need him in the coming week as the temperatures start to climb. And he is the inventor of air conditioning. So let's give him a round of applause, because without Dr. Carrier, we probably wouldn't be as happy as we are throughout the summers here in Arizona. Now, also, the Phoenix New Times has named me Best Historian several years running, as well as the Phoenix New Times named me the Best Bespectacled Phoenix Celebrity, because I do indeed like my eyewear. Now, if you're wondering what is Marshall wearing, because I have my own idea of what I think looks good, and, you know, and pretty much everything has a story. So, you know, every year, February 14th, we hold a celebration right here in Arizona for Statehood Day on February 14th. And back in 2012, we had one heck of a celebration. And they did events across the state, including on the lawn of the Capitol. They had a big old main stage set up and all kinds of things going on. And someone gave me 15 minutes on that main stage to talk about anything I wanted to. And I chose to talk about an event was actually started back in 1926 by Charlotte Hull, who was our first poet laureate here in Arizona. It was called Masque of the Yellow Moon. It was always a springtime event. It was based on a legend about how the god of sun would give his rays to make the earth golden and warm and make things grow. It was held here at the Ellerslie Shriners Temple, which is just down the street from the old state capitol. It then moved on to Montgomery Stadium. And, you know, this is our first stadium in Arizona, and a lot of things happened here, not just the Masque of the Yellow Moon, but it was also home to our very first bowl game. And I sure wish someone would bring this back, because I loved how it played into Arizona's history, agriculture, because it was called the Salad Bowl. And, you know, you would expect nothing less than the queen of the salad bowl riding in her very own salad bowl with spoon and fork to serve from. Now, that event, Masque of the Yellow Moon, ran from 1926 to 1955. At its height, it had about 5,000 high school and college students performing in it. It was woven into the curriculum of all the Phoenix Union high schools. In fact, the debate club would do skits. You had multiple marching bands in front of those really large sets, as well as costumes designed by students and made by home ec. And I was lucky enough to find a few dresses in a box. And, you know, what you're looking at here, those dresses are from the late 30s. And you may have already guessed, but I'm not a very good wallflower. So I needed something that would stand up to those amazing dresses. And so I talked to my friend Glenn. Now, Glenn is in the early 90s now. He rolled in town in the early 50s as a sign designer. In fact, he just got recognized by the Arizona Sign Association for all the work he did, including signs like My Florist over on 7th Avenue McDowell, as well as Mr. Lucky's, which I don't know if you can see, but I'm actually wearing my Mr. Lucky shirt. And so I had him paint a suit coat, and he decided that he wanted to do a suit coat that was an homage to the Arizona state flag, which was perfect for a centennial. Now, the reason why I like to tell this story is because there's so many different ways it can go. But the beauty of it is I was doing an event for the Arizona First Families, and afterwards, a woman tapped me on the shoulder, pulled out this dress, all covered in butterflies. It was her mother's dress that she wore in the Mask of the Yellow Moon back in 1928 or 29. So on with the show of what we would do at Valley Bar. What we're here to talk about is the year 1931. Herbert Hoover was president. The Empire State Building came online for the public. Alka-Seltzer became something for all those revelers to seek some relief with. Airstreams came on the market, and you can still get them today. Those iconic aluminum Twinkies. Also, the Dust Bowl was in full swing, and so many folks were moving west looking for a better way of life. And sometimes those cars broke down right here, and those families stayed because they couldn't afford to get the car fixed. The first Apple Watch came to us back in 1931, why on the wrist of none other than Dick Tracy. You also have gambling made legal in Las Vegas. It was also the height of Prohibition. And you know, right here in Arizona, we have our own Prohibition stories. Now, one of them I like to talk about is the fact that this tanker right here, what they would do is they would pour all the confiscated booze into that and spray it on the street. Another thing they would do is they would go into a hotel and pour it down the drain. But the staff got wise and realized that if they went into the basement, they could tap into that drain and bottle it and sell it pretty much as fast as they could. Now we're going to hear some stories. Now I would love to say sex, drugs, and I can't say rock and roll because it was back in 1931. So it would have been the big band era. Now, have y'all heard the term summer bachelor? Because as we get ready to go into summer, you might notice it gets a little warm here. Well, what would happen is a lot of families would send the women and children up north. And that left a town full of men and their vices. It was talked about how as the families are going north, the busloads of prostitutes would be rolling in. And October 16th, 1931, unleashed a story about the Tiger Woman, the Trunk Murderess, the Hatchet Lady, Winnie Ruth Judd. Now, you can read about Winnie's story. Janice Boomerbach has probably the best known book, The Trunk Murderess. There's also Winnie Ruth Judd, The Trunk Murders, and by Dobkins, and that was originally printed back in the early 70s. You can also read fictionalized versions such as Bury Me Deep by Meg Abbott, as well as a slew of detective magazines where you could read about Winnie Ruth Judd from her psychiatrist, her husband, anybody that would sell their story, they would get written up in a magazine. Why, at one point, even Winnie Ruth Judd appears in a magazine talking about her own life. Now, people of the day, they were reading about it in headlines above the fold. It was selling newspapers across the country. You can also go on YouTube and search Murderess, which is a vintage marionette puppet movie, which is actually really well done. My friend Scott off in LA spent about 3 years working on this, and it's really good. Now, the reason why Valley Bar brings me in, if you've been to Valley Bar, you'll notice that there's a big shadow mobile right above the bar. Well, this tells the story of Winnie Ruth Judd, and so they're getting so many questions about her that they bring me in once a month to kind of do the History Underground. So we tell the story of Winnie Ruth Judd and then add on other little bits of random facts. Every time we do it, it's always a little different with a lot of Arizona history. Now, our story actually starts back in Indiana, which is my home state. I'm a Hoosier. Grew up in a town of about 25 people, a little tiny farm town. That's the house I grew up in, and it was about 15 minutes away from where Winnie Ruth Judd grew up. She grew up in a little town called Oxford. Now, I'm sure the residents of Oxford would say that their most famous resident is probably Dan Patch. That was a horse that was known to run really fast. And here we have little Winifred McKinnell. Now, her father was a minister. And, being from a small town, I completely understand her desire to get out. Oh, and my friend Seal is on from Indiana as well. Another Hoosier. So she got her first job in the state mental hospital in Indiana. And that's where she met a doctor. Now, I can't say dashing young because he was 20 plus years older than she was. But they got married, and she was probably hoping for the life of a doctor's wife. And what she really got was a morphine addict. So they did a lot of traveling through Mexico where he would get a job, his habit would catch up with him, and those jobs got further and further apart until there were times where he couldn't support the two of them, not even himself. So they would often split up, and she would go off and have adventures for a while, and then they would come back together again. And then here we have Jack Holleran, also known as Happy Jack. He was an A-lister in town. Now, he ran a lumber yard. Kinda, sorta. But anyway, lumber was king, and so he was very much in the in crowd. So the Westward Ho, the grand dame of hotels that still stands in downtown Phoenix, plays prominently into the story because that's where Winnie Ruth Judd goes and gets her first full-time job. There was a level that had offices, and so she walked into an office, and the secretary thought, this young woman is mousy and quiet and will be kind of the perfect live-in nurse nanny for the family. And so she starts to work in this little white house. Directly across the driveway is Jack Holleran's house. And so she would see his Packard roll up every day. And the eyes met from across the porch. They went on and had lunch at the Westward Ho. And before long, it was a full-blown affair. She then soon got a job here at the Grinnell Clinic, which still stands today. And that's where she met her friends. Now, she had a job working as an X-ray technician, and soon all three ladies became fast friends and moved into this duplex. Now, for the longest time, this duplex was on an endangered list because the owner wouldn't sell just that corner. He owned almost the entire block. And suddenly our worst fears came up was there was suddenly a fence around most of the block. And so as we try to figure out what to do, suddenly someone buys it. And so what's really cool is it's going to become his law office. He's actually taking out, and even though it's a duplex, and with the columns, that's the side where the girls lived. And he's turning the whole place into a law office. And there's one bathroom that he's prominently in the story he's going to leave as found. He's also doing a really great job of refurbishing the house. He's done things like pulling out the windows that were added in the 50s and he found the original windows in the garage. And so it's kind of interesting. If you go to 2nd Street in Catalina, you can see this house, but directly next to it is a brand new multifamily housing complex. As well as, so the girls were kind of known of loose morals. Good time girls. Jack would bring guests from out of town, business associates, and they would all go to the house and have a lot of fun. In fact, one of them brought a radio so they could have dance parties. And even though it was prohibition, there was always booze for everybody. Now, what we do know on that fateful morning of October 16th, 1931, by the time the sun came up, there were 2 young women who had been stabbed and 2 had been shot. And the 2 roommates wound up in 4 trunks. I will let you guess how that is possible. Those trunks then wound up at the Phoenix Union train station on their way bound for LA. Now, by the time those trunks got to LA, they weren't as fresh as they once had been. And so by the time they pulled them off in LA, they had to quarantine them. And when Winnie Ruth Judd tried to retrieve those trunks, they said, "Ma'am, you can't have your trunks." And she pretty much said, "Well, my husband has the key." And she ran out, and they let her. She was on the lam for almost a week, held up in a variety of spots across LA. By the time she gave herself up, she had a new do of the time period, a fur, a nice dress. And when she walked out, she was beautiful. And suddenly people started saying, if you're pretty, you're innocent. If you're ugly, you're guilty. So obviously she must be innocent. And so she was brought here to Maricopa County, where she stood trial. Now, she never took the stand in her own defense, and there's various reasons. Now, many times the story will change as she would tell it. And so she either was never allowed to tell her story or she didn't want to. And so she was found guilty. She almost became the 2nd woman in Arizona to be hung, and she was taken to Florence. Now, while she was there, she wrote a 19-page confession letter that chronicles some of what might have happened that night. But soon after writing that letter, she tried to swallow a razor blade. And after that was thwarted, she was then moved to the mental hospital over on 24th Street in Van Buren. And she was there for almost 40 years, except for the 7 times she escaped, up to 6 years at a time. Now, everyone loved Winnie Ruth Judd because she was quite popular. She would cut people's hair. And so I've got a lot of friends who either had family that would go get their hair cut by Winnie Ruth Judd, or they even worked the hospital. Now, while she was there, you might wonder, how did she get out so many times? Well, people had felt she had been railroaded. So someone gave her a set of keys to the front door. And so we do know one time she got as far as the front door and came back in. One time she made it all the way out to Mesa to visit a friend of her father's, but he brought her right back to the hospital. But the last time she escaped, she was gone for 6 years. She had gone off to California before she was discovered and brought right back here to Arizona. Now, while she was in the state mental hospital, she befriended, at that point, a young Rose Mofford, who was fresh from Globe and was kind of the eyes and ears of the governor at that point. And because they weren't very kind to folks with mental illness back then. And so she was kind of letting him go. Now, Rose and Winnie Ruth Judd became friends. They often would hang out together after she was released from prison. Oh, to be a fly on the wall and to hear those discussions. I mean, Rose was amazing, but every time I ever met with her, I was always told never to mention the name Winnie Ruth Judd, or the conversation would be over and I'd likely never get to talk to Rose again. Now, when Winnie Ruth Judd passed away, she was then taken to California, where she was buried under her maiden name so that nobody would ever find her. And you can see how well that's worked. So now we're going to go on to a few more stories. Now, this man you might know just from that title of No Bull. Tex Earnhardt. Now, he was born in Texas back in 1930, and he just passed away April 19th. He made it to 89, almost 90. Now, he moved from Texas back when he was a teen. Now, he grew up on a ranch, and so he had aspirations of going into rodeos. That was his dream. And so he pursued that dream when he came to Arizona. But you know what? He wasn't that good. And so he was lost. He had lost his competitions. He was broke and didn't know what to do. His dad opened a gas station. And so together they bought a Ford and they sold it from the gas station. Soon there were a couple more cars. And so from there on, his business grew and exploded. Now he started doing his own commercials, and they were known for kind of being a little probably corny, but they really fit with his personality. He was never outside of himself. In fact, his famous line, "That ain't no bull," well, it's said to have come from, at one point he was working on a commercial and someone shouted, "Nice bull." But because of his ranch experience, he knew that he was sitting on a castrated bull, which made it a steer. So he responded, "That ain't no bull." And that story stuck, and that tagline stuck and became kind of the moniker for how he would do business. Now, his cowboy ways, his goal was to treat customers like they were your mother or your sister. And he impressed upon his own staff that they should do the same thing. Now let's see if we can make this a little bit bigger, because what I love about this ad is you could buy a brand new 96 Ford for $2,000. I sure wish I could go shopping right now. I would probably get myself a great little convertible, or maybe a pickup truck. Now, this is a photo of, he said he had the world's largest bull that would often travel around. He would take it to parades. He would take it to, here it's a group of cheerleaders up in North Phoenix, and they would pose the bull. Now, he tried to at one point put this in his Tempe store, in his Tempe car lot, but Tempe had a rule against signs, and so they wouldn't let him put the bull there. They then kind of hammered out a deal where he could bring it in for a few days a month, but had to haul it away. But then Tempe realized that there's no way they could really kind of police that. And so they allowed him to have it there for a few months and then it had to disappear. So it did a lot of traveling around. Now, besides having a big plastic steer or bull, he also was known for a variety of other things. He had alligators, coyotes, lions, horses, and monkeys. And so when he said that he was selling cars, he was often selling an opportunity to see these animals. He said people would come just to see even his world's largest bull. Now, he also started getting into other industries as well. Why, in fact, he got into the marine business, auctioning off and selling boats. He also got into the spa business, where you could buy a spa from Tex. And he loved Arizona. Why, at one point he said for a New Year's resolution, he said there are a lot of little pockets of Arizona that he's never been to. And one of his goals was to get there. Now, he was always active, going on trips, but also exercise. Even when his wife would come in town for things, he would go and work out. He ran marathons. He was always literally running around. Now, he's famous for knowledgable, where you could get a license plate frame as well as a license plate when you bought a car. He even had his own license plate that said "No Bull." So we did indeed lose a pioneer of marketing that really helped fashion Arizona into what it is today. Now, when I was reading about his license plate, I was like, well, no bull. Okay, what are other license plates that you couldn't get? And I found a document that was about 70 pages long, full of all kinds of names that you can't get a license plate that says. And so here are a few of my favorites, such as Bed Rockin', Bad Mofo, Hump, Sombrero, and for some reason, they don't like the planet Uranus. And I guess they don't like wine because winemaker is not something that you can get printed on your license plate. So it was a kind of interesting list. There were some things that were shocking that people would even try and get on a license plate, but it was kind of a fun little read. I would also like to give a shout out to our very own Rusty Warren. Now, Rusty just had a birthday and she turned 90 years old. Now, when I first met Rusty, it was in a thrift store. I was going through a series of albums and ran across Songs for Sinners by Rusty Warren and had a sticker on it that said recorded live in Phoenix at the Pomp Room. And I had never heard of either one. So I ran home to Google and discovered her webpage, where I learned that she had 15 albums to her credit. Several of those albums had gone gold, but she was considered to be quite a body comedian. And so she was never allowed to play on the radio, but she did do a lot of recording and a lot of performing. When she moved here from the East Coast, she expected to become a piano teacher, but she got a job in the Pomp Room working as a pianist. And it paid more than what she would have made while she was a piano teacher. So she took that job. Now, the place wasn't much larger than her piano. In fact, there was actually a little chair, a little rail around the piano, so you could sit your cocktail on it. And she was at first started playing just music, but then she started adding her own humor into it. Now, her humor was always very pro-female. And that leads up to kind of her hit song, which was called Knockers Up. Now, that song was so big that when she traveled around, she was selling out packed bars across the country and little clubs. In fact, a couple of years ago, I was able to assist with her archives as we were looking for the original sheet music because the Library of Congress was admitting her as the birth mother of the sex revolution for that song, Knockers Up. And here she is a couple years ago. I like to say that Rusty is still a broad, I would say, in probably the best sense of the term. Now, if you have any questions, suggestions, or other ideas for stories, or even photos that you're like, wow, what an amazing photo. I mean, I don't know if you can see it, but even now, let's see. Let's do this. So even tonight, my backdrop on my little green screen is indeed that amazing Shadow Mobile at Valley Bar. Now, what's next? I mean, I was doing a lot of different things and wound up having to cancel actually quite a number of shows and even some tours that I was doing because now that we're still kind of under quarantine and stuck at home, even though Arizona's opened up, you know, so not quite sure where things are going. So trying to always do things. And one of the things I really missed was getting a chance to share stories with people as well as hearing their stories. Because, people are some of my best sources of information. That's where I get some of my best stories because they will talk about different things that never showed up in the newspaper or are at the very tail end and nobody would have found. So that's the reason why I love going out talking to people, is getting them to share their stories. Now, I've also started doing a Arizona History Happy Hour. That's every Thursday night at 7 o'clock, and that's weekly up until it's no longer needed. Because I figure, we all need a little diversion, a way to kind of escape, and it's something fun. And so this coming week, we're actually going to be talking about vintage fashion with my friend Jenny Cooler, who is also known as Redhead Sadie. And so we're going to have a great time. There'll be trivia. We'll talk about a little Arizona, a small town, as well as always some Arizona music history, because we have an amazing amount of music history right here in Arizona. Now, I've also done bus tours. In fact, in October, I typically would do a Winnie Ruth Judd bus tour, as well as kind of a haunted Phoenix. And so I'm still trying to figure out if that's going to fly, what's that going to look like, or what are the other options. So kind of looking for that what's next. I also work with the Arizona LGBT Plus History Project, working with ASU and Phoenix Pride as we start documenting and preserving our LGBT history. I am also a member of the Arizona Adventure Sign Coalition as we get a chance to try and preserve neon, which we are a hotbed of right now in Arizona. I am also on the board of the Fabric Foundation, which is the nonprofit side of Fabric, and they are known for doing the PPE gowns right now with local hospitals and other organizations. Now, this show is only made possible with your support. So up at the top of the screen, you'll see a Venmo. If you have an opportunity or if you have the ability to, a few bucks, whatever, anything, just so that we can continue going on and doing things like this. I know there'll be a couple more things coming up in June, so keep on the lookout. So I do want to say thank you all for coming this evening. Are there any questions, comments, or other things? I mean, what's fun is this is a monthly program, so hopefully we'll start doing it monthly, either right here or actually maybe at Valley Bar. We shall see how the time holds out, but getting a chance to do that. So again, we can all still be close together, whether we're side by side or not. So if you do want to share any stories or things with me, you can follow me on Facebook, which is Marshall Shore Hip Historian, as well as email, which is hello@hiphistorian.com, as well as Venmo, Marshall Shore. So are there any questions or comments? Nikki, thank you so much for being here yet again. And Susan, great to see you as always. Oh, and someone's asked what's in my cocktail glass. Well, I could just say water, but I'm sure you can tell by the color. It's actually a little bit of bourbon. Actually, it's a Manhattan. So, we just did, actually with the State Capitol Museum, we did a happy hour, and my friend Stephanie was the guest. And so I was able to find out that Governor Hunt, our first governor of Arizona, his favorite cocktail was a bourbon Manhattan. So that's what I'm enjoying this evening. So that way I'm sipping a little bit of history as I'm talking about a little bit of history. So thank you all so much for watching, and be safe, be healthy, and be well as you go out or stay in, whatever you do. Just make sure you protect yourself and others. Thank you so much and have an amazing rest of your night. And I hope you all had a really good weekend. Good night, all.